So with each exhalation, bringing ourselves a little bit more into this present moment. And as you exhale, imagine that there's a kind of very fine filter descending from above your head down through your body and just picking up any tension, any muddiness, any confusion, whatever of the stuff at the surface of your experience that you brought with you in just getting here this morning. And just let that filter pick up anything that's not pure light and moving it down through your body and dropping it into the earth through the floor of your pelvis. And after a few cycles of that, recall a moment in the past. It could be the recent past or the distant past, when there was some experience of physical light that you found particularly magical or entrancing. It could be the first sun after many days of Seattle rain. It could be the first light of sunrise. Maybe you were at Burning Man and you stayed up all night and you got to watch the sun come up. That very fine light of dawn in the desert. Or maybe it was an experience of sunlight reflecting off of ice crystals or moving water. Or summer sunlight coming through leaves. Whatever. And with your creative imagination, this being the right use of creative imagination as distinguished from our usual use of imagination to worry about things. Bring that moment present in your creative imagination as though it was happening right now, and especially recall whatever feeling in your body that this experience might have induced in you. Like a feeling of expansion, a feeling of spaciousness, a feeling of upliftment. Or, as I said, magic. And regarding that light as having a kind of subtle substance, using your breath on the inhale and on the exhale to sink deeper into that remembered experience, and to regard this light as having a kind of subtle substance that exists between the molecules of the air that we're breathing. And begin to breathe it into your body. So on the inhale, contacting this experience of light and lightness and spaciousness. On the inhale, bringing it into your body. And on the exhale, using that experience of light as the filter for just removing any dross, any confusion, any muddiness. And on the inhale, you can, if you wish, allow that light to take up more and more space in your body. And on the exhale, letting it carry anything that's not that light out of you. As you may know about me personally, I represent a very, very old lineage of Sufi adepts. And the Sufis have these power words, which are spoken of as names of God, but are really seed energies of all creation and all consciousness. And these are used as mantra. And the Sufis use the word nur, N-O-O-R, nur. It's the name for light in all of its different countenances. And by repeating the word nur, either out loud or subvocally in thought, that word aligns us with that light, which is kind of the matrix of a subtle geometry of the whole universe. So if you wish, you can think nur on the inhale and nur on the exhale. And just notice if that has any effect on your experience. It might or it might not. Inhaling light from this remembered experience brought into the present. Nur on the exhale. Letting this light fill you from, really from all directions, not just from above. changing focus of attention just a little bit, centering in the heart, inhaling light from all directions and from nowhere in particular, and exhaling light radiating from your heart. And notice what, if any, effect that has on your experience, how that might change things. And if you wish, you can even let this radiating light extend beyond your body. And when you're ready on some next breath, drop this focalization into your belly. 3 or 4 fingers widths below your belly button, and about 2 or 3 fingers in from the surface of your belly skin. Finding a place, not placing your attention where you think something ought to be, but discovering a place in your belly that is more alive, more presential, that really draws your attention to it. That's the right place. And inhaling light from all directions and no direction in particular. And exhaling light from the belly. And notice how, or if that changes your experience. Thinking newer on the inhale and newer on the exhale. We'll mention in passing that there is a great treasure of potentials in our pelvis. Our belly and our pelvis is rather neglected in most spiritual practice. And so dropping our attention to the floor of the pelvis, to the perineum, place between your butthole and your lady bits or your guy bits. Breathing light in and out of the floor of your pelvis. Just noticing what happens when you do that. Some people, when working with this center, get a color photism or impression of a kind of battleship gray. And if you do, just notice that. Know that it's something that happens. If you don't have that experience, that's fine. There's no shoulds about any of this. There's something a little more interesting. On the inhale, thinking the word nur, draw light and life force up from the floor of your pelvis to the belly center. And on the exhale, letting light and life force settle back to the floor of the pelvis. I'll just keep shuffling back and forth between those two locations. And you might notice a kind of subtle conversation between them. It's not exchanging information really, but it's a kind of association, a kind of relationship. Some people will notice a photism or color impression of a kind of canary yellow at the belly. And if that's you, don't push it away. You can, if you wish, visualize it. That might or might not be helpful to deepen the experience. And so for a few breaths, just shuttle back and forth between those two locations. And don't think about nadis or anything that you might have read in a book. Just notice what is actually happening. And when you're ready on some next breath, with your awareness, finding a location on the left side of your chest, about midway between your collarbone and your lower ribs, and about a palm's width from the center line of your chest. And somewhere in there, you'll find a spot that has more aliveness, perhaps more sensitivity. It may draw your attention in some way. And now, centering in the belly, inhaling, thinking the word nur, and drawing light and life force from your belly up to this location on the left side of your breast. And on the exhale, thinking newer and letting light and life force find its own path, settling back into the belly. And the route it takes may be a straight line, it may be a curve, it may be a spiral. Notice what it is rather than try to make it into something. And you may find that this process encourages you to adjust your posture a little bit. So what's often helpful is to raise the breastbone, drop the shoulders back, drop the chin, and let the head move a little more over the shoulders rather than jutting out as most people hold their heads. Some people in this process will experience a color impression of no particular size in the left breast of being kind of ruby red. And if that's you, just notice it. And if it's not you, it's okay. And if you wish to visualize an orb or a nimbus of ruby red in that location, go ahead and try that. See if that changes your experience in any way. And noticing whatever relationship there might be between your belly and this place in the left breast. Thinking newer on the inhale and newer on the exhale. And the light and life force that are moving between these locations might have a color or it might not have a color. It could be completely clear. It could be white. It could be kind of pearlescent, like the corona of the sun when the disk is out of sight behind a tree limb or the edge of the building. And when you're ready, on some next breath, locating an analogous place on the right side of the chest, about halfway between collarbone and lower ribs, and about a palm's width from the center line of your chest, finding a place around there that draws your attention or has more presence or aliveness or sensitivity. And centering your attention in the left breast on the inhale, moving light and life force all the way across your chest to this location on the right. And on the exhale, letting light and life force move back to the left, thinking nur. Just see how that feels. And some people experience the color of a pearlescent white on the right side of the breast when doing this practice. And if that's you, well, if it's not you, that's okay. And if you wish, you can visualize an orb or a nimbus of a pearlescent white light in that location. And when you're ready on some next breath, centering on the right side of your chest in that location, in that center. Inhaling, thinking nur, and drawing light and life force to the center of your chest. And on the exhale, thinking nur and letting light and life force move back to the right side of the chest. And I might mention in this process that these centers, if we'll call them that, are neither in your body nor not in your body. They exist in their own realm. They do have an effect on the physical body. They have a profound effect on our consciousness, on the texture of our experience. They don't necessarily have any relationship to human anatomical features, even though there's a lot of stuff in metaphysical bookstores that people who think they do. And so sweeping light and life force between the right side, the right center, and the heart. Just watching what happens as you do that, feeling the relationship or the conversation between these two locations. It's in many of the classical descriptions of centers or chakras, the color in the center of the chest is a kind of leaf green or forest green. And if that's what you experience, just allow that. And if that's not what you experience, that's fine. And if you wish to visualize the color of leaf green with sunshine coming through the leaves, or perhaps leaf green, forest green shot with gold tendrils, do that. And when you're ready, on some next breath, locating a place in your forehead on the vertical center line of your forehead and perhaps a finger's width above your brows, finding a place that draws your attention. Inhaling, centering in the heart, inhaling light and life force up from the heart to this location in the forehead. Exhaling, thinking the word war as we've been doing, settling back to the heart and just sweeping light and life force between these two locations. Again, noticing whatever relationship or conversation might be happening between these two centers. Noticing if connecting these two centers in this particular way changes your experience. Letting this movement in light and life force find its own path. Don't make it do something. This is neither in your spine nor not in your spine. Many people, many adepts experience the light at this spot in the forehead as being a kind of indigo. But let it be what it is. I'm getting a kind of sapphire blue at the moment. It's not your experience, that's fine. And when you're ready, on some next breath, centering in this spot in the forehead, breathing light and life force up to a place about a finger's width above the top of your head at approximately the anterior fontanelle, that place where you had a soft spot when you were an infant. Inhaling light and life force from your forehead up to that location. Exhaling, thinking you were letting the light and life force settle back to the forehead. Some people find it helpful to lift their chin just a little bit. And at the top of your head, you may experience a color of a shimmering, luminous black. And if that's you, well and good. And if it's not you, that's perfectly fine. And this black is the light of total absorption. It's the light, as it were, of the absolute, of complete cessation, where consciousness becomes completely still. No movement whatever. No identity, no self, and in a sense, even no consciousness, because consciousness requires an object. And when there's no object, consciousness resolves into its ground, which is what the Sufis call a pure intelligence with no content. It can be witnessed, but it can't be understood. It can't even be thought about. Because thinking in language is inherently dualistic. And in the absolute, there is no self-reflection. But the witnessing of it and the gradual approach closer and closer to this fundamental extinction does have an effect on the soul. It teaches the soul very directly about its true nature. And it can show the soul, it can teach the soul about itself. And it can become that moment when the soul perceives itself directly instead of through the reflections of external objects. And that's the portal to what in spiritual parlance is called enlightenment or awakening. When the soul perceives itself by means of itself instead of through anything external to itself. Objects, minds, thoughts, emotions. And the effect of this black light, when it begins to move in the way that it does, have an effect on our individuated consciousness. And one of the first things that it does is to confront us with all of our nonsense about ourselves. So there's a whole psychospiritual process of purification that this light, which the Sufis call Nur al-Siyah, and actually each of these centers that we visited is a portal to a particular boundless dimension, each of which has its effect when that portal is open, shall we say, of alchemically catalyzing certain transformations in our human incarnation. And how that works is the study of months or years. But just this process of transiting these centers in this particular way is very helpful in this process of removing from this human incarnation what does not properly belong to it. These things that we technically call impurities. Anything that's not in alignment with our true nature, anything that we took on from society, our crazy families, our crazy school system. So for a few moments, just sitting with whatever this little journey has precipitated. So we're going to take a break in a couple of minutes. I'll pause the recording or Sherry will pause the recording. So don't let yourself get spaced out by this. I mean, euphoric states are wonderful, and all of us need that little vacation from typical experience of being ourselves. But really where the rubber meets the road is the clear and integrated and coordinated, open functioning of all of our subtle centers all at once. So again, bringing experience back to our physical bodies. If there's been any change in how your body feels on you, just notice that. You might find it helpful to return to centering in the heart or centering in the belly. and regarding our physical bodies as a concretization, as a precipitate out of something subtler, of the movement of all of these centers in unison. So here's a couple of things from Rumi. And he gave this little bit of poetry at dawn on the occasion of doing practices like this. His whole circle, which was several dozens of his closest students, they've been doing practices like the ones that we just did all night. And he said, this we have now is not imagination. This is not grief or joy, not a judging state or an elation or sadness. Those come and go. This is the presence that doesn't. What else could human beings want? When grapes turn to wine, they're wanting this. When a night sky pours by, it's really a crowd of beggars and they all want some of this. This that we are now created the body cell by cell, like bees building a honeycomb. The human body and the universe grew from this, not this from the universe and the human body. Those who don't feel this love pulling them like a river, those who don't drink dawn like a cup of spring water or take in sunset like supper, those who don't want to change, let them sleep. This love is beyond the study of philosophy, that old trickery and hypocrisy. If you want to improve your mind that way, sleep on. I've given up on my brain. I've torn the cloth to shreds and thrown it away. If you're not completely naked, wrap your beautiful robe of words around you and sleep. Inside this new love, die. Your way begins on the other side. Become the sky. Take an axe to the prison wall. Escape. Walk out like someone suddenly born into color. Do it now. You're covered with a thick cloud. Slide out the side. Die and be quiet. Quietness is the surest sign that you've died. Your old life was a frantic running from silence. The speechless full moon comes out now. So let's take about a 10-minute break. pause that recording and just stop. So once again, presencing ourselves to, first of all, our physical body. With each breath, inhaling light, exhaling any muddiness, dross, thoughts, concerns, emotions. It's particularly difficult for people who are givers, to give themselves the time to not just for self-care, but there's a deeper level of giving themselves permission to really feel and be themselves, regardless of the expectations or the needs of the people around them. And we can't give of what we don't have. So some of us have a particular need of taking the time and taking the space to turn within and find a certain fulfillment from within our own deep substance, rather than deriving fulfillment from how useful we are to other people. So, dropping into the heart, breathing light, life force in and out of the heart, not just in the front, but actually spherically in all directions, including the back. And ideally, if there is such a thing in this life, the heart's radiance shines as far in the back as it does in the front, and as far below our feet as it does above the head. And there's a particular capacity of both strength and upliftment that comes from developing those potentials that reside, as it were, at the back of the heart. between our shoulder blades. And you can see this in some particularly evolved people. The image of angels having wings in Western medieval iconography is actually a representation of this development that I'm talking about. And as in that iconography, at rest, those wings are, the tips of those wings are down. And then there are times that the heart takes wing. Represented by the Sufi symbol of the winged heart. And actually, everybody wants their hearts to take wing, but it's a rare human being that will remove the life vest that they've carefully constructed over their lives to actually let those wings spread. It takes a certain fearlessness. So dropping into the heart first. And then dropping into the solar plexus. So somewhere between the bottom tip of your breastbone and your navel, find a place that seems to be more open or perhaps more vulnerable. Or it may feel more defended. And just abide for a few breaths at the place that draws your attention. So the Sufis hold that the heart has, the spiritual heart has four chambers. These are not the four ventricles of the physical heart, but they're the chambers, as it were, of the spiritual heart. And we just went through three of those: left side, right side, center. And the fourth is what's sometimes called the solar plexus. And just abiding for a few breaths at that location, breathing in and out of it. breathing light and life in and out of it. A place that feels real and authentic, not the one that you read about in a book. And you may notice the texture of that experience beginning to change a little bit as you simply abide there. And some people find it useful to imagine that there's a kind of opening there, sort of a portal. It can be like the aperture of a camera lens that expands and contracts to let in more light or less light. Or maybe like the iris of your eye. It expands and contracts. And in this exercise, let it expand on the inhale and contract on the exhale. It's often helpful in this regard to drop the chin. And there's a way that you can enter this portal into its peculiar dimension. It's not inside your body, but it's a different kind of inside. And it can feel like you're in a swimming pool or on a lake and doing a surface dive where your body is face down horizontal and you bend sharply at the waist and put your feet in the air and go into the depth that way. Or it might feel like you're kneeling on the floor in front of a trap door and you pick up the lid and you bend down and you put your head below the level of the floor to see what's underneath. And so there's this sense of bending and turning down or within. And on each inhalation, allow yourself to descend, as it were, a little deeper. And this interior dimension of awareness it has a different dimensionality than physical 3D concrete reality. And it can feel a little awkward to do that dive within, it often feels like you're turning inside out and upside down in order to enter it. And so you can use your breath to practice moving back and forth across this kind of semi-permeable membrane. On the inhale, doing that transposition. On the exhale, returning briefly back to conventional 3D. But at some point, dive deeply into that space and just remain there, disengaging from the shuttling back and forth across the portal with your breath, and just breathing normally and abiding in this interior space. Or if you wish, on every next inhalation, move a little deeper. Explore what deeper actually means in this dimension. And you may find it helpful to put another of the Sufi power words on your breath. And in this case, the word is Hu. And think Hu on the inhale and on the exhale. And the Sufis call this dimension Na Koja Abad, which roughly translated means the placeless place or the spaceless space. And as you abide here and settle in, time and space don't mean the same things here that they do on the surface of your experience. Everything is about as equally near or equally far. And the deeper you go, it becomes more apparent that even form and distance don't mean the same things as they do in 3D. And it may have shown up to you by now. But this interior dimension is boundless. And the reality is that there's only one of it. This is collective. There's that little scum on the surface of this boundless ocean that is personal to each one of us. That's the portal. That's personal. Your interior is collective, and it's even beyond collective because it's beyond form and identity altogether. It's also a different accessing to that mode of knowing that we visited at the top of the head a few minutes ago. And this is also an accessing, a portal to a realm of creativity and a realm of fulfillment that transcends our personal minds, our personal emotions, our personal limitations. It's possible, and it does happen, that whole new potentials emerge in us into our individuated human life from this well. This boundless ocean. And when the mystics talk about turning within or sourcing from within, this is the within they're talking about. It's not the within of your personality. It's not the within of your history or who others have taught you to believe are. And in this dimension of Nakoja Abad, which is boundless, is also boundless inner freedom. You didn't create this, it's always been there. So here's another stretch. When you're ready, on some next breath, breathing as deeply as you can into this boundless depth on the inhale. And on the exhale, coming back to conventional 3D reality, space, time, form. Practice moving across that portal at the solar plexus. Inhaling, moving within, exhaling, returning to the surface. If you wish, you might find it helpful to open your eyes briefly as you return to the surface, and then closing your eyes to turn within. Some people have a natural facility with this. Other people need to spend a little time practicing the practice. One is not better than the other. If you find it awkward, it will get easier. And I'm going to present a particular frame of awareness. And it's this. Because of the mechanics of consciousness that are involved in this moving between these different, with this dimensional shift, even though you're inhaling, even though your body is inhaling as you turn within, the movement of light and life force and prana is actually simultaneously an exhalation into this inner space. And when you exhale in physical 3D reality, you are, because of the nature of the mechanics of consciousness, you are simultaneously exhaling from this interior dimension. I'll say that again a couple of times because it's weird. When we inhale, in physical reality, we are simultaneously exhaling into this interior dimension. And when we are exhaling in physical reality, we are simultaneously inhaling from, that means to ourselves, from this interior dimension. So you may have heard somewhere or read somewhere that we draw things to ourselves by inhaling, and we release things from ourselves or send things out when we exhale. This is actually what's underneath of that particular idea. And so for a little bit, just abide at that interface between these two modes of awareness, these two modes of knowing, these two modes of experiencing. And just be with the idea or the sensation that the inhale in physicality is simultaneously an exhale on the inner planes. And that as you exhale in concrete reality, you are simultaneously drawing things to your personal incarnation from the inner boundless. And if you want, you can see how far you can stretch. How far within can you drop or settle or sink or ride this current of light and life force that is your breath, not the physical breath, but the actual movement of prana between these planes. And if you simply abide at the interface between these two modes of knowing, between these two modes of existence, these modes of dimension, extending awareness into the inner boundless on the inhale, bringing awareness back to conventional, familiar 3D reality on the exhale. You may have an experience, and you will have the experience if you do this enough. Enough means anywhere from the next 30 seconds to the next year, if you're diligent working with this. You may have the experience that you, not just your solar plexus, but your whole being is that portal between these worlds. And if you actually really read Rumi or any of the Sufi masters in their particular way, not just read his poetry, but really study his teaching, he makes frequent reference to making the two worlds one. This is what he's talking about. This integration of the inner boundless and the outer infinity, Newtonian infinity, even relativistic infinity. So in a few breaths, we're going to open our eyes, but I will give some instruction on how to do that first. Start by seating yourself very solidly in this interior dimension. And then remaining there, but allowing your eyelids to open very, very gradually. First, you're just letting in a little sliver of light, and then you're looking through your eyelashes. And this is a very impersonal glance. We tend to grab the environment with our eyes as a way of orienting ourselves in physical space, but also orienting ourselves within our personal ego. And so you have to assert a little mastery here and resist the temptation to just open your eyes and look, but rather open your eyes, but remain within. In this interior place, if I might need to make it explicit, there's no ego there. There's no fear. And so it's almost like the place that you're looking at the room from is behind your eyes a couple of feet. And your eyes are just windows. The way you look at a distance through the windows of your house to the outside. And as I said, this is a very impersonal glance. You're just letting shapes of different colors kind of occur to your eyes. So begin that now. Stay really dropped in. And if you wish, turn and face one of the other members of this circle, looking into their eyes. Look through their eyes. To the inner boundless that they are accessing, which is the same as yours, because there's only one. So you have to look past, look through, look beyond the body, the personality, all of the things that you think you know about them. It's almost like looking into the night sky when there's no moon. And this takes a lot of surrender. It takes a lot of allowing. Any assertion of ego is going to mar it in some way. Any attempt to do it right or to assert some piece of your persona will block this from working. You have to be, as Rumi said in the poem, you have to be completely naked. No contrivance, no bullshit, no image management. Just what you are. So when you're ready, just relax. Took a little longer than I expected, but we got started a little late, so that's my excuse. So I'm going to read a discourse given in the 1920s by the Sufi master Hazrat Inayat Khan. So this was my teacher's teacher, and he gave all of his teaching in English, which is kind of cool. And he had secretaries taking everything he spoke in public or in his teaching, took it down in shorthand. So we've got a pretty good record of what it was he said. And he brought a form of Sufi practice that was very, very well laundered of religious and cultural accretions, and gave a teaching that was adapted to the needs of Western seekers. And so he goes into a great bit of detail about certain principles. Actually, left an enormous amount of material that has been published, and then a smaller body of stuff that is just privately circulated amongst the initiates and the teachers. And that's what I'm going to be reading from here. This used to be totally secret. Time to jailbreak these practices and teachings from their shackles of symbolism and ritual, patriarchy. So here we go. And he goes into a lot of detail about, air quotes, purification. And he says that, I don't think in this discourse, but somewhere else, he says that pure salt and pure water are equally pure. When something is pure, it's just itself without anything else added. And so my pure being is going to look and act differently from yours. So it's not like there's rules about how this is supposed to work, but purity is also a knowable thing. He says, the principal thing to attain happiness is to purify one's mind from all things that disturb it and create inharmony. They're not only bad impressions which disturb the tranquility of mind, but there are many feelings of resentment and resistance against things which do not agree with one's own idea, which disturb one's mind. I don't think anybody here has feelings of resentment and resistance against things which do not agree with our minds. The person who has some business to carry out, some profession to attend to, requires a tranquil mind, but especially the one who journeys on the spiritual path needs tranquility of mind most. Prayers, concentrations, meditations make no effect when the mind is not purified from all disturbances, or as we might say in today's language, when our nervous system is dysregulated. Therefore, for an adept, no cost and no sacrifice is great enough to keep harmony within oneself. A Sufi tries to keep harmony in the surroundings, the harmony which demands many sacrifices. It makes one endure what one is not willing to endure. It makes one overlook what one is not inclined to overlook. It makes one tolerate what is not accustomed to tolerate, and it makes one forgive and forget what one would never have forgotten if it were not for the sake of harmony. But at whatever cost harmony is attained, it is a good bargain. For harmony is the secret of happiness, and in absence of this, a person living in palaces and rolling in gold can be most unhappy. So here's where it gets crunchy. Harmony is brought about by attuning oneself to all beings, to all things, to all conditions, to all situations. And he who cannot tune himself tries to tune others. And while trying to tune others, he breaks the string. It is like a person who has a violin in his hands wishing to tune the cello. If he wishes to be in tune with the cellist, he must tune his violin to the cellist's pitch. Every soul, as its nature, seeks constantly for harmony, but barely there is to be found a soul who really knows how to create it. If one says, "This noise which goes on always next to my ears makes me mad," he cannot stop the noise. He must know how to close himself from that noise. If he cannot to accustom himself to that noise so as to be able to bear it and eventually to rise above it, that it may no more create inharmony. Very often at the sight of inharmony, one tries to escape it. But inharmony has such a wonderful magic that if one avoids it in the east, one meets it in the west. It never leaves a person. One whom it loves, it follows. And the best way to meet with inharmony is to try and harmonize with it. Knowing that the source and the goal of all things is the perfection of harmony, and bearing that idea in mind, if one met with inharmony, which has no existence in reality, which is like a shadow, it must certainly disappear as the shadow disappears at the sight of the sun. And he goes on. It is very difficult to evolve oneself and at the same time to keep in tune with the unevolved ones through life. It is like being drawn from above and at the same time being pulled from below. And if there is anything that can save us from being torn to pieces in life, there is only one way, and that is to respond, to resound to all that is asked of us. It is this principle which is taught by Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount may seem to teach a willing surrender to all, but that is not the way to look at it. The real lesson that one can learn from it is to harmonize with oneself with all notes instead of with one note. Every note is fixed in its place, so is every person fixed in their ideas and ways. But the one who treads the spiritual path is all notes and is no note in particular. Therefore, that one may rightfully be called the keynote, the note which makes a consonant chord with every note that is played with it. I'm going to do that again. The Sermon on the Mount may seem to teach a willing surrender to all, but that is not the way to look at it. The real lesson that one can learn from it is to harmonize oneself with all notes instead of with one note. Every note is fixed in its place. So is every person fixed in their ideas and ways. But the one who treads the spiritual path is all notes and is no note in particular. Therefore, that one may rightfully be called the keynote, the note which makes a consonant chord with every note that is played with it. So the frequencies in this sound is a tremendous number of frequencies and overtones. But the overall effect is very harmonious. And so we just did a practice of turning within and sourcing a different mode of knowing. Next class, if I was going to teach a next class on this theme, would be how to become that keynote that forms a consonant chord with every note that it meets, the way this bowl bell is composed of so many, probably thousands of discrete frequencies. It forms a consonant chord. Yes.
I tried taking that because if you start with a fundamental frequency on the 12-tone scale, the upper notes are that frequency times the 12th to the Q. And harmonious frequencies are simple multiples of the base frequency and the other frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And if the frequency you're trying to harmonize with is inharmonic to base frequency, there's no tone to kind of a fixed tone that harmonizes with everything else. The chord that you're trying to harmonize with might be inharmonious.
It might be dissonant. True.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's life.
Yeah.
That's life. And there's also a resolution because it's not a static system. It's not standing waves. It's always moving. there's always a movement, there's always a possible movement, if not the next chord, the one following that. There's a progression, there's a cadence that moves towards resolution in those dissonances. And one of the things that I so love about Bach is how masterfully he sets that up.
So
I mean,
saying is that the note that harmonizes finity pulses basically driving those body notes into harmonies.
well, we are not, as developing human beings, or as not developing human beings, we're not inherently separate from that whole context.
Yeah. So things come together.
And what that movement towards, I mean, just the way that Bach will, like, 6 measures or 12 measures previous to the dissonance actually set, I mean, you can see him setting it up to do the dissonance and then its resolution, which is also part of setting up, something that is another dissonance and resolution down the line. I mean, that's the magic of Bach.
Okay.
And we are not separate from the context in which someone comes into the vicinity being angry, being upset, being dysregulated, being, perhaps deliberately provocative. And that totality, implicit in that, the way Bach has set up the progression, half a page previous, implicit in that is the movement that we as conscious human beings can respond in a way that moves towards a harmonious resolution of a dissonant chord. And the artfulness in that is, it's not a technique. It might look like a technique from a psychodynamic perspective, but it's not. And the real masters of spiritual practice or psychotherapy that I've studied with, they're not using a technique. It just looks like one if you think that everything is static and we're separate human beings and who, manipulate things. That's not actually how that works.
My mother was good with harmonizing cups.
Yeah. And it requires, just as he's saying in this discourse, it requires a certain harmonization, both with, first of all, within oneself, which was, the whole class was just like basically, kind of providing a platform for that. Okay, here's some basics. And this is basics. This is all basics. Here's a place to start, to begin developing or developing what we already have in that regard. And each of us is going to have different challenges in that progress. Those of us who are very, who tend to give ourselves up to the needs of other people, are already very adept at knowing what their needs are and what a possible harmonious progression from that might be. But if we don't do it from our own deep center, then it's incomplete. And if we are very hyper individualistic and believe at a deep level that we need to defend or that we need to make things happen, that's a different set of challenges in this process of becoming very responsive, but also very authentic inside of a disharmonious situation. And so that practice of diving within provides a very solid, but not rigid center from which to engage these kinds of things.
When you're talking about the exhalation physically being an inhalation into the deeper space, is a way to visualize that as you exhale, basically do a cycle, but it's coming back into your belly? Or
you can. I mean, how? So the practice that I gave really comes from a particular awareness. The practice is a contrivance. It's not at your solar plexus. It's nowhere. That's just where most people find the easiest access to it. You could do it on your left shoulder, or your right, whichever shoulder. It doesn't matter. It's a contrivance.
Is it kind of like the circulation of energy or just something else?
It's breath. And what that means in mystical terms, especially in classical Tantra or Sufism, the breath isn't the physical gas that we squish in and out. It's that movement of life force and consciousness, two sides of the same coin, that is continually moving between all of the planes, from the unmanifest, finally concretizing as physical things and bodies and minds, and also returning. Now, if things like the macrocosmic orbit practice engage you with that flow between all of these different planes of density and consciousness, yeah, you can do that. It's not necessary to get quite that elaborate with it, though, in my experience. Simply just abiding with that felt awareness of how the light of awareness and life force move between the inner boundless and the surface and return. So there's a further piece of this that I didn't get into because time and flow. When you just sit at the interface, if you just abide at that interface between the inner and the outer, extending into the boundless, returning from the boundless and feeling the outer multiplicity, infinity of forms and things, you'll have this experience where this your felt sense of you collapses and you become the portal, your whole being. And your individuality just kind of dissipates like, like fog when the sun comes out. And to begin to become aware of just how enormous that flow really is. And the bits and pieces of energy and consciousness and thought forms that reach the stage, from being nothing, just a pure impulse at the level of the unmanifest, and vibrationally picking up speed, becoming denser until, if there's enough impulse from source, all that stuff kind of pops through into concrete reality and becomes things and events and thoughts and all the stuff. And we also seed that. We seed the human collective with all of our stuff on the return flow. That flow is happening continually. It's never not been happening. What we're touching, and we're just scratching the surface with this and this little thing that we did. We just barely dipped a toe in that ocean. The flow itself is boundless. Because our minds are conditioned by our physical senses into thinking that there's discrete objects, that puts a certain impress on our awareness. And part of spiritual practice is breaking that constraint, that particular kind of conditioning that our sense impressions kind of force upon our perception. As long as we believe that we are separate human beings, as long as we are identified with our separateness, let's say, the universe behaves as though it's a dome with a reflective inner surface. And the stuff that we exude or launch or extend or release from ourselves into that dome comes back. And incidentally reinforcing itself in a feedback loop. And the name that is classically given to those return echoes is karma. Mm-hmm. And so every little bit that we release ourselves from our felt identity, the more free we become of those return echoes. They simply have no effect. Mm. And we also stop putting garbage into the collective. There's one more riff here. He goes into, this is actually a really interesting body of stuff. The real purification of mind is in purifying it from thoughts and impressions which live in it as a germ of disease. The best way of cleansing the mind from all this is to be able to empty the mind of any thought, feeling, or impression. To be pure means to be natural. The spirit in us, in its natural condition, is not a thought, but mind, not love, but heart. For as the thought is the outcome of mind, so is love the outcome of the heart. To attain to the purity which is the seeking of the mystic, one must be able to purify one's spirit from every thought and feeling, however deeply impressed or engraved in one's heart. Here's where it gets really crunchy. Mm-hmm. The mystic goes as far as purifying himself from his identity by removing it for a certain time and putting something else in its place. From beginning to end, the whole process of spiritual development depends upon this. So that's really hardcore. To purify oneself of one's very identity by removing it for a time and replacing it with something else. The something else is provided to us by the practices of our tradition. These practices have an objective reality that is not contingent on what happens here. Those basic principles that these different techniques are an access to existed before these bodies, before all of this stuff in time and space. And these practices of mantra and, in classical tantra, deity yoga and those kinds of things are all devices to tune our consciousness, tune our felt identity to that which is self-subsisting outside of time and space. And by diligence and by a lot of grace, there are those moments when those inherent self-subsisting realities remove us from ourselves and we experience the living reality of those principles. I don't know what else to call them, seed energies. And in those moments, the soul truly recognizes itself. And there's a moment of awakening. And there's more I could say. I don't think it would help. So.
Thank you.